which is where? Right, it's down in the southern part. So he originally lived here in Ur. They came all the way up through this area, to this little area right here called Haran. We'll talk about that in just a moment. All the way down here into the land of Canaan. And because there was another famine, they've ended up down south of there again in this little region right in here near Kadesh Barnea. And so he says, I want you to leave here and go all the way back up into the land of my kinsmen. Now, he didn't go all the way back to Ur. We find out as the story progresses that he went to the area where his brother Laban was from, and it's right up here in this top part called Haran. So he left here and went all the way up into Haran, is where he's going to send the servant to find a wife for Isaac. Now Isaac, he didn't want Isaac to go with him. I don't know the reason for that. It doesn't tell us what the reason for that was. But there were two things that he makes very clear in his oath to him. One was, I don't want you to let him take a wife from the people of this land of Canaan. He didn't want a Canaanite woman for Isaac as a wife. Number two, I want you to get him a wife from those of my kinsmen, which is kind of interesting because Abraham, years earlier, was all the way over here, and God said, hey, I want you to take up and leave your family and go to a place that I'll give you as a promise. And so he had left his kinsmen, but yet God saw fit to have him select a wife from his kinsmen, not the Canaanites, not the Canaanite women. Now, if you remember earlier, there was a curse placed on one of Noah's descendants. Do you remember? He said, "Cursed be who? Cursed be Canaan." Now, if you remember, the story was in reference to who? When the curse was placed, Ham, right? So Ham had left him uncovered when he was drunk and had passed out naked. And Ham left him uncovered, and instead of saying, "Cursed be Ham," he said, "Cursed be Canaan." Now we know this had to be prophetic language because we know through Old Testament Scripture that God says He don't judge a father for the son's wrongdoings, and He don't judge the son for the father's wrongdoings. So we know how God feels about that. He wants people judged for their own actions. This was prophetic language speaking of the land of Canaan, and I think God knew full well what Ham's descendants were going to look like here in Canaan. And we do see later, as the story progresses, what type of people lived here in Canaan. They were bad, right? What kind of things were they participating in? We've already covered the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. I think we have a pretty good idea of what some of the people were involved in that was from this area. Pretty much anything deviant that they could get involved in. But this was, to the point of their children passing through the fire, which means what? They were doing human sacrifice at one point, and so these people were involved in just about as despicable acts as you could imagine. Very vile, evil people is what ended up in the land of Canaan. And such vile people that when they had the conquest of the land, 400 or 500 years later, when they came into the land, God said, I want you to destroy every living, breathing soul in this region because I don't want you to intermarry with their wives if you kill the men, because they'll influence you and they'll change your heart and they'll teach you evil that they're participating in. And we know the story how it progressed. Did they obey that command? Didn't, did they? And later when Israel was carried into captivity, uh, I'm sure God had to reflect back and think, I told you. I told you don't intermingle with these people because they will bring you down. They did. So here, early on, there's some foresight in Abraham's instruction to find a wife for his son Isaac, not from the Canaanite women, but go back to my kinsman, find a wife from there. So the servant says, what if I go all the way over there and I can't get a woman that's willing to come back with me? And he says, an angel is going to go before you, help you. And if you go all that way and you try to find a wife for my son, he refuses to come back with you, then you're relieved from the oath. Now, he had faith in God, and he knew God would provide. And this master servant obeyed his orders. And he saddled up. How many camels did he saddle up? 10. Why do you think he carried 10 camels? Carrying a woman back with him, but he carried gifts there and probably brought all of her belongings back, right? Her and her belongings. But he saddles up 10 camels. Now, I don't know what he sent as gifts, but we do know a little bit of it, and it started off with gifts of gold. And we're told that this man Abraham had become great in the land. And I could imagine if he sent a dowry for his son, that this was a pretty nice purse that was being sent. Enough that it took 10 camels to haul it over there. Some gentlemen to come along and help manage what he's carrying. And I could imagine if you were traveling all that ways, this would be a little bit of a scary journey, because if you had gold and all this stuff that you're carrying and you're having to go all this way back over into Haran, this would have probably been a little bit of a scary journey. So the master servant gets up, saddles up the 10 camels, and they leave. And they head over and they come to this area again that's called Haran, which is the area where Abraham's brother Laban is. And so, and I said Laban's Nahor, I think, is who I was meaning to say that. And so he comes there, and it says that he got the camels to kneel down, and there's a well there. And as he gets the camels to kneel down, he tells God, please, if you will, kind of like give me a sign this is the right woman to ask. And he says, if I ask for a drink of water and a woman comes and offers to fill that need for me with a drink of water, but she also says, hey, I'll draw up enough for your camels until they drink all they need as well, then this will be the woman. And if you'll do that for me, I'll know that this is the right person. And the scripture says that before he finished speaking, Rebekah appears at the well, and she says, she'll draw him up some water, and she said, by the way, I'll draw up enough for your camels and have them drink as well, as much as they like. And it says that she was a beautiful woman. Now, I've thought about this a lot when it talks about her being a beautiful woman, but here she's drawing up water for him at the well, and also enough for his camels. And I've thought about, how many feet deep would a well be during this day probably to draw water? And I don't really know for sure, but if you could imagine a 100-foot, 200-foot well to hit water, and you got a rough rope that's hanging there, and you're having to feed this in. I'm just thinking to myself, without any gloves, you're drawing in this picture. How many of you ever picked up a 5-gallon bucket of water? Pretty heavy, ain't it? Have you ever tried to draw it with a rope? That's a lot of work, isn't it? Now, I don't know if this was equivalent to 5 gallons or not, but if it was a pitcher sufficient to draw water for camels, this wasn't probably a small container. Here, this beautiful woman has come, and she's offered to draw water not only for him, but for 10 camels. I don't know how much camels drink. Does anybody have any insight on that? I can imagine it'd be a bunch. And, one of the reasons that camels are used in the desert because they can store up a lot of liquid. And they can go for a really long ways without having to have a drink, right? So here this beautiful woman has offered to draw up this water. So undoubtedly she's a very capable woman as well. And so the gentleman that has gone to find this woman falls down immediately and starts to worship the Lord. Yes? Woo! Wow. So 30 gallons, if they drank 30 gallons apiece, 10, that's 300 gallons of water. He sure did. This was a working woman, beautiful woman. A very hard-working, capable, beautiful woman. So he falls down immediately and worships the Lord because he understands that this is the woman that he's been sent to find. And he takes out a nose ring of gold and some bracelets that are made from about 10 shekels of gold, and he gives them to her as a gift. And he asks, who's your father? And she tells him her father's name, and he realizes, hey, this is the daughter of Methuel, which is Nahor's daughter. And so he's very pleased, and he asked to come to their house. And before they finish speaking, though, her brother comes up, Laban. And Laban comes up, and she recounts what's just happened. She says, hey, this man has come, and he's asked the angels to identify by whoever this woman comes to the well and says, hey, I'll pull a drink up for you, and also we'll pull up enough for your camels. And Laban is like, well, come on, we'll prepare a place for you, and you'll stay the night with us. And he invites him to their home. And when they get there, they come and they tell the family what all has taken place. And you can just imagine if you're here living in Haran, and this man shows up with 10 camels and gold. He tells you this story, that how it's all came about. And what does her father reply when they're told the story? He said, this thing's from God. What am I? Who am I to say anything about it? So he said, take her and go. I can't imagine. Here's a man that shows up out of nowhere, and he's got some men with him, and they've got camels, and he's asked for your daughter to carry back to marry some guy that you've never met. And he says, this thing's from God. Just take her and go. This is from God. Who am I to say anything about it? So you can see the great faith that all these men had to be able to understand that, if something's from God, that who are we to say? And I can imagine this would have been a difficult thing to give your daughter away like this. We've talked about it before that, marriages at this time, a lot of times were arranged marriages, and it seems like that it was more of a thing of property in some cases. Here's a man that came bearing gifts, 10 camels worth of gifts, and offers them for this young lady's hand in marriage for his master. And, he understands that this had to be from God, and he's not going to stand it. So they prepare a place for him to stay, and they feed the camels with hay, put them up for the night, and they get ready to feed them. And, before they ate, this servant master says, I can't eat until I get this business behind me. And he said, I really, this is what I'm here for. And he goes back and recounts, asks if they'll be allowed to take her, carry him back to the master. He agrees. So early in the morning, they spend the night. They're fed. They stay the night. And early in the morning, they get up. And when they get up in the morning, the servant says, we need to go ahead and head back, to the master, because this is something that needs to go ahead and place. We don't need to linger. Her mother said, give us 10 days with her. Just give us 10 days to have her, a few more days here. And can you imagine, giving up your daughter to go into a foreign land? You didn't have vehicles to go down and see her. It might be the last time you ever saw your daughter. And he says, we don't need to linger. This is something we need to go ahead and get this going. And so they call for the daughter, and she says, well, we'll ask my daughter if she's willing to go. So they bring Rebecca in, and they present this to her, that she's going to need to leave right away. What was her reply? I'll go. And so here, again, this is something that shows a lot of people with a lot of faith, and a lot of people that had a lot of faith in God, because they knew the things that had transpired were not normal happenings, that they were things that God meant to happen. Now, Rebecca, we're told, was a beautiful woman. What are we told about Isaac? We don't know, do we? We don't know what he looked like. Not really told. He was a man of great wealth. He had been given how much of his father's wealth? All of it, right? Yes. I don't know. It's a good question. Well, undoubtedly, they didn't stay covered up all the time, but we'll see as the story progresses that as they approached Isaac and she realized this was the master, she covered her face. So she wasn't covered heading over there, put a veil over her face. So here she agrees to go, and who did they send with her? Her maid or a nurse, basically, that would come and help her and be her aide. And then they sent whatever belongings they sent with her that were hers. And so they brought a dowry there, and they, I'm sure, carried back some things that were personal to her to go and to meet the master. And so, sight unseen, she's going to be married to this man of great wealth. We're told that he was given all of Abraham's possessions, and Abraham had become great. So I was laughing about it, talking to Thomas upstairs, but I said, it goes to show even back this far, women marry for money. I'm kidding. But arranged money, right? But no, she understood that this was from God, willing to go and to marry this man. And you would think so. And so as they approach, she sees and she asks who this is, and they identify that this is the master. And she says, it says that she covered her face with the veil. And they went into his mother's tent, and they became one flesh. Married, and we're told that how old was Isaac at this time? 40 years old. And Rebecca was barren at first. And how old was she when she had her first child? 60. So they had a pretty long honeymoon, you might say, before they had children. And so she marries him, and they are very happily married. Thomas made another point. We were chit-chatting before service, but it was a very unique point. This is one of the only patriarchs that we see talked about that didn't have multiple wives that's described. Now, he may have had it, wasn't mentioned in the scripture, but there's not a mention of any other wives, where all of the other patriarchs, multiple wives or concubines. And so here, he loved Rebekah, and she appears to love him. And so they're married. Now, Abraham is getting on up in age, and how long did Abraham live to be? 175. Now, when this story took place, how old would he have been roughly? Probably around 137, neighborhood 40. So he lived another 30-something years from when this story took place. But we're told that he gave all that he had. He'd become great, and he gave all that he had to his son Isaac. We're also told that he gave gifts to who? The sons that were through the concubines. He gave gifts to them. Now, when Abraham died, remember earlier he had bartered for a cave, or actually paid for a cave of Machpelah for Sarah. And when he dies in chapter 25, this is the verse that I made reference to last week. I couldn't remember what chapter it was in. But when he died, we're told in chapter 25 that Ishmael and Isaac buried him in the cave of Machpelah. So this is in verse 9 of chapter 25, and his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which is before Mamre. And I thought that was significant because, you know, we have two factions of people in today's time that are diametrically opposed, that are having lots of problems. And we have the descendants of Ishmael, the Arab people. We have the Jewish people and Christians today that follow through that section of people that are through Isaac. The promised son Christ came through Isaac. So you have Christian dispensation, and you have those that were followers of Ishmael. And it seems at this point in history, they were not enemies. Now, we are told that Ishmael would be what kind of person? He'd be a crazy man, didn't it? That his hand would be against his neighbor continually. That holds true even today. And we see that very evident with the Arab people, where their hand is against their neighbor continually. Having said that, Ishmael and Isaac buried their father together. And I have to think that they believed in the same God. And otherwise, I just can't imagine that God would have saw that he prospered and given gifts by his father. I could guarantee you that this man's father, Abraham, taught him about Jehovah God. So I think I've got to think that during this time that their belief in God would have been Jehovah God. I don't know where Allah comes in the picture. We know that 600 years later, this episode, a false prophet, Muhammad, one that done so much to influence that segment of people. What a shame that, here at this juncture in history, these two men getting along well enough to go and bury their father together. Just some notes of interest that kind of interested me as I looked at this, looking at Ishmael's descendants versus Isaac's descendants. Any thoughts or comments? So chapter 25, Abraham again took a wife, and her name was Keturah. And she bore him Zimram, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Eshbuk, and Shelah. And it goes on and it lists a whole host of folks that were of the lineage, through of this man, through this woman, Keturah. And it goes on, it's starting in verse 7 to describe Abraham's death and burial, and gives his age. And then in chapter 12 it says, "Now this was the genealogy of Ishmael, Abraham's son, who Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's maidservant, bore Abraham. And these were the names of his sons, of the sons of Ishmael, by their names according to their generations." And it gives, I won't read all those, but it starts in verse 13, and it goes down through and it lists these names and their princes that were through them. But what was God's promise to Abraham about Ishmael? What would he promise some of his descendants? Make a great nation out of it. Abraham, and he did. We see great evidence of that today. And it says that his people dwelt from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt, as you go toward Assyria. And so when we say east of Egypt, as you go toward Assyria, Egypt is here, right down in here. And so if you're east of Egypt, his descendants spread from here. Where's Assyria at? Up in here, right? All the way up in all this area right in here, referred to as Assyria. So his people spread all of the desert. So Ishmael had a great descendants, and when we look at the Arab people today, what we refer to as the Arab people, all this land right here pretty much is the descendants of Ishmael. Now, in modern day times, they're fighting over this little bitty piece of land right here. All the Palestinians that you see are descendants of Ishmael are laying claim to the holy sites that are in Jerusalem and in Israel. That's what we're seeing a lot of this fighting over today, back and forth in Israel. And we see them saying, "Oh no, this is our land," and the other one saying, "Oh no, this is our land." The holy site that we saw in the picture last week, the second most holy site, still stands today, where the cave of Machpelah is that we spoke of this evening, still stands there today. They're still fighting over it today. Whose is it? We see other places, the Wailing Wall and places like that they're still laying claim to. Very contentious. These are some of the most contentious places on earth today. And it's squabbling over their rightful land. So it gives then starting in verse 19, this is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son, and it says Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, his wife, and it gives the list here of children that he had to Bethuel the Syrian. And notice he's labeled as Bethuel was the Syrian, and Bethuel was the father of Rebekah. And so they were from the area where they're fighting pretty heavy today. And verse 21, now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren. The Lord granted his plea. His wife conceived, and but the children struggled together within her. And she said, if all is well, why am I this way? So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 people shall be separated from your womb. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Who is this speaking of? Jacob, Esau. Now, again, Thomas made another really good point. We were discussing this, is that this had to be prophetic language because we never really saw Esau serve Jacob, but his descendants did. This is another occasion where it seems to be speaking in prophetic type language of future actions that would take place. But here, two nations of people, Esau's descendants ended up down in this area right on the Transjordan side. Jacob's descendants, all of Israel, eventually. When her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb, and the first came out red, and he was like a hairy garment all over, and they called his name Esau. What's another Hebrew name for red? Later, the territory was named Edom. Try to remember, Edom means red. And what other red event took place with Esau? Think of red, lentil, stew. So these are red was a theme, it seems like, in this story. Red skin, red lentil stew. Edom, the territory, later was named after him. So, first came out red. He was like a hairy garment all over. They called his name Esau. It's hard to imagine a baby coming out like a hairy garment, right? Most of us think of little cute, cuddly children, male or female. Hairy is not something we normally think of when we think of a small baby. Afterwards, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. What does Jacob mean? Deceiver. There's another word that's often used. Yeah, it was later named Israel. His name was changed to Israel. That's a very good point. But supplanter or deceiver was what Jacob meant, and he did supplant his brother later twice, right? And once with the birthright and once with the blessing. And I think I've always, in times past, kind of merged those two things together, but those were two separate events where he supplanted his brother twice, or deceived his brother twice. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. And we're told that Esau was a skillful hunter and a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man, and he dwelt in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he loved to eat the wild game that he went and killed. And we see the story later where he's about to give the blessing, and this is a time where he's getting close to death. He just wanted a good savory meal before he passed this blessing on. Asked for the venison they would make into stew, and so we're told here that Isaac loved this. He loved the game, the venison and stuff that his son would hunt and provide. Who loved Jacob the mostest? Yeah, the mother. And that, this is something that we see from time to time in families where parents show preference, and it's never a good thing, is it? I mean, when one parent seems to be favoring one child over the other, there's problems, right? And we see this happen, and it's a real thing. Here we're told verbatim that his mother loved him more, and this is just who she favored. But the father favored Esau. So we again see this in families a lot of times. Just happens that both my parents love me the most, Kid. I was the last in the progression of children, so it didn't. I just kind of got what was left. So, but here, the story kind of gets queued up by talking about these relationships and how they felt about this one over the other one. And we're told that Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came into the field, and he was weary. Now, this seems like a little bit more than, hey, I just come in and I'm tired and I'm hungry. I really feel like that Esau had been out hunting and had maybe stayed in the field long enough that he was at the point of death, is what it really feels like here. He comes in and he's weary, and he wants some of the stew that's been prepared, and his brother says, I'll give you this for your birthright. And he's like, well, what good is it to me if I'm dead? So he agrees and gives up his birthright, takes of the stew. So again, I think this is a matter of later in the story we see the father where he asked him, how'd you find the venison so fast? When Jacob's trying to trick him, he had to lie about that. But probably wouldn't have been a real easy thing to go out in the mountains here. I'm thinking it might have been a day or two journey out and find a venison and track it down and kill it and get back. Went out to hunt like that and you're unsuccessful, run out of water and you run out of food, you might have done real good to get back alive. Come back in and want something to eat, ask your brother proposal to birthright. What do you think the difference in a birthright and the blessing was? Oh, I think it was, and I think it's a lot of what it says it was. The blessing was a blessing that was bestowed upon him, and it referred to not only his well-being but also his descendants. Seemed like it was kind of prophetic in nature as well, and it was a spiritual type thing. But the birthright itself was physical. It was his belongings, inheritance. Traded it out for all of. That seems like a small thing to us, but again, we don't know the circumstances in terms of how desperate for food he really was. But he made a good decision. We're probably would have fed him. You're right. And it's kind of funny the language that's used later to refer to Esau giving up this birthright. And it's really kind of I don't know, read the language later. Just to me, it's kind of unsettling to think that he was counted like he was, words that I'm searching for. It's mentioned later in the scripture, though, as if Esau was kind of, yeah, that's true. Any other thoughts or comments before we stop? We're about out of time, and we'll stop right there and pick back up with the rest of that story. But another great story, and we're reeling right on through Genesis chapter 25 or 26 here. So we'll stop right there.